Welcome. You sent us some really compelling source material this time. Excerpts from a chapter looking at these big life lessons, the burdens we carry, and this whole idea of finding out who we really are.
That's right. And this deep dive is really about getting into these concepts,
hmm
especially this framework it presents, this idea that we have these internal parts.
Like sub-personalities.
Sort of, yeah, parts that hold certain beliefs, emotions, often burdens we've picked up from family or life.
And the journey it describes, it's not just about finding some perfect self. It starts with figuring out who you aren't, doesn't it?
Exactly. Identifying the extreme beliefs and emotions held by these parts, the ones that might be running your life without you even fully realizing it.
Okay.
And the goal ultimately is to know your core self and become self-led. But it's definitely a path with twists and turns, not a straight line.
Right.
So our mission here is to go through this material, pull out the really insightful bits, and see how these ideas about our inner world actually connect to, well, our everyday lives and relationships.
Okay, let's unpack this then. So the basic idea, the foundation, is that we're all here to learn certain lessons.
hmm A specific set for each of us.
And step one involves unloading these burdens, things we've picked up from family, culture, just life.
Yes, exactly. And think of those burdens as setting the stage almost. They prepare us for the most important lesson, finding out who you really are, what the source calls your self.
But the starting point is a bit counterintuitive, like you said, not trying to find the self directly,
Right. You start by figuring out who you aren't.
which means identifying these parts.
Yeah. These distinct sort of sub-personalities inside. They each have their own feelings, beliefs, ways of being. Some parts, called exiles, hold the pain from past hurts.
Okay.
Then others, protectors, step up to manage things, keep those exiles safe. They might be people pleasers or critics or big achievers.
Got it. So you identify the extreme beliefs and feelings held by those parts, the ones driving the bus unconsciously.
That's the key.
Yeah.
Realizing those intense reactions, those rigid beliefs, they belong to specific parts. They aren't your core identity.
Okay. That makes sense.
The whole process is about getting to know yourself, that core of calm, clarity, courage, compassion that's always there underneath the noise of the parts and learning to be led by that. And yeah, it's definitely not linear. You have insights, then parts jump back in. It's a process.
The author shares a really quite a striking personal story about this. He talks about carrying this deep feeling of being worthless and pathetic.
A burden held by his exiles, he says. He traces it back to his father, who was often frustrated.
And this feeling, it drove him, made him achieve things outwardly.
Yeah, he functioned well, looked successful, but inside felt like he was fooling people. Always guarded, terrified someone would see the real me, the pathetic part.
And here's the really fascinating bit. He says this feeling stuck around even after he'd had these profound experiences of self through meditation.
Right. Even while developing the very model we're discussing. His exiles would still pop up, especially if he didn't get that external validation, reminding him he was a pathetic loser.
Wow. So intellectual understanding wasn't enough. Even spiritual experiences didn't just wipe it away.
No. It seems the real shift came from outside feedback. Friends in his community told him his protectors, maybe the guarded parts, the achievers, were actually getting in the way of his leadership.
And that made him look deeper.
It seems so.
Mm.
He talks about needing to really connect with and unburden a little boy inside who was stuck with that good-for-nothing feeling from his dad's yelling.
And the outcome of doing that specific inner work.
It sounds profound. After he retrieved and unburdened that part, the little boy felt inner delight, and his big achiever part could actually relax.
Ah.
He describes knowing, really knowing in my bones that he was lovable and loving, not worthless.
And that knowledge, that deep feeling, gave him the courage to share his work.
Yes. To bring it into a world that was, often skeptical, the main point of his story, as he puts it, is that we are sacred beings, as are our parts, as is the earth. Too many people die without knowing that.
That's powerful. It really underscores that the deepest healing comes from connecting with those parts inside.
Exactly. It's about experiencing that inherent worth, that sacredness in yourself and even in those difficult parts.
Okay, let's explore this more. If the goal is becoming self-led, what does that actually, look like in day-to-day interactions? The source says when you're in self, you relate from calm, clarity, creativity, compassion.
Yes, those C's qualities. Self-led communication isn't about learning fancy techniques. It just flows naturally when you're in self.
Okay.
The main challenge, the source suggests, isn't mastering the skills. It's convincing your managers, those protective parts, worried about how you look, about failing to actually trust self to handle things. It'll be
Especially,
tricky conversations.
yeah, I can relate to that. My managers would be like, don't say that, just stay quiet. So what does this mean for the really tough stuff, like repairing relationships after you've messed up?
Well, here's what's interesting. When you're more self-led, the source suggests repair is actually less difficult, internally at least, because you can work with your own parts first, the ones carrying shame about the mistake, or maybe wanting to downplay it.
Ah, okay.
You can reassure them that making a mistake doesn't make you a bad person, which might be different from how you were treated as a kid,
Right.
right? So it's a crucial internal healing step.
So you deal with your own shame or defensiveness first, internally.
Exactly. And because you develop that capacity to be present with your own difficult parts, your own hurt, you then have the space to be present with the other person's hurt without needing to immediately fix it or defend yourself.
That makes so much sense.
The source says it directly. The way we relate to our parts translates directly to how we relate to people when they resemble our parts.
Wow. That's a huge insight. So conflicts with others are often like echoes of our internal conflicts. What about anger? Someone else's anger directed at you.
Well, if you've done some work to understand and be okay with your own anger parts, you're much less likely to get totally derailed when someone else is angry.
Mm.
Their judgment won't automatically hook your inner critics or trigger shame in the same way because you have a stronger connection to your core self.
Mhm.
Hopefully those critical parts inside you have relaxed a bit, found new roles.
Right.
So many relationship problems happen because we're terrified of the mayhem someone else's feelings might stir up in our own inner system.
And when self is leading, that internal mayhem isn't so easily triggered.
Precisely. Now, the source is realistic. It says you won't be self-led all the time. Parts will take over sometimes.
Sure.
But the key difference is when a part does take over and you hurt someone, you learn to notice it happening sooner. You get some space from that part, listen to what it was trying to achieve, maybe it's fear. And then, crucially, you can go back to the other person and speak for that part from self instead of just acting for the part.
Like saying, wow, a part of me felt really attacked just then and reacted defensively instead of just continuing the attack.
Exactly that. It shifts the whole dynamic from accusation to explanation.
Okay, now here's where the source brings in a term that definitely caught my eye. Tor-Mentors.
Yeah, it sounds pretty intense, doesn't it? But it's actually a really powerful reframe.
Okay.
The argument is that often our biggest teachers aren't the obvious ones, like gurus or professors. They're the difficult people, the challenging situations, the ones that really push our buttons.
The ones that torment us.
Right. But by tormenting you, they actually mentor you. They shine a spotlight on exactly what needs healing inside you.
So the strong emotions, they trigger the anger, the hurt, the shame. They're not just problems, they're like trailheads, leaning you to those exiled parts.
Exactly. Trailheads leading to those parts holding the original pain, like the author's little worthless guy. And what's fascinating is that our manager parts are often so good at burying these vulnerable exiles
Right. Keep them locked away.
that you might not even know they're there until a tormentor comes along and activates them, or activates the protectors trying to keep them hidden. Your managers might even try to distract you, keep you busy, so you don't go near that pain.
The author gives examples, right? His parents, some clients, and especially his wife, Jean. He calls her an outstanding tormentor.
Yes, challenging his inconsiderate, narcissistic, and overworking parts, as he puts it.
Yeah.
And significantly, he says they are outstanding tormentors for each other.
Ah, so it's mutual.
And that they still help each other heal this way, even after big fights.
Now, the source is very clear here, adding an important warning. This isn't saying every difficult person is some kind of teacher you have to endure.
Absolutely not. It's definitely not advocating staying in abusive or harmful relationships. The lesson there is self-care, boundaries, getting out safely.
Right. Crucial distinction.
The point isn't to excuse bad behavior. But the idea is when your parts do get triggered in an interaction,
Right.
even a difficult one, you need to set boundaries in it. Never hurts to pay attention and take care of them internally.
Okay.
Maybe the internal lesson, even as you're setting an external boundary, is for your triggered parts to learn to trust yourself to handle it, instead of reacting in old, extreme ways.
Seeing things this way, it makes life feel less like a series of random frustrations and more like, well, the source calls it an interesting series of opportunities to learn that big lesson of who you really are. It even gives that acronym, AFGO, Another thing growth opportunity.
It's a pretty stark reframe. And it acknowledges, look, your protectors will try to convince you the other person, the Tor-Mentor, is the only problem.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes externally, their behavior is the problem.
Sure.
But even then, the internal opportunity remains. Can your parts trust yourself to care for them and navigate the situation? Whether that means engaging differently or leaving, it shifts the focus inward.
Okay, so the source material includes a practical exercise for this, right? Advanced parts mapping, using a trigger from a tormentor to learn about the parts involved.
Yes, the goal is really to use the energy of that trigger, that moment of activation, as a way into your inner system. It helps you move beyond just feeling overwhelmed or reactive.
To actually seeing which parts are showing up.
Exactly, and understanding what they're trying to do, what they're protecting.
The author gives that example of forgetting the phone call with his brothers.
A seemingly small thing, but boom, instant trigger. A critic part comes in sounding just like his father, then a wave of shame from an exile.
And he notes being surprised by the intensity, even after all his work.
Right, which shows these things run deep. But he used it as an opportunity, worked with a partner on it.
So how does the exercise actually guide you? What do you do?
It suggests starting by focusing on the main protector part that gets activated in that triggered moment. You try to locate it in or around your body. Notice the sensations, the feelings, the thoughts associated with it. And the goal isn't just finding one part, but seeing the whole network. Other protectors might show up too. How do they feel towards each other? Do they team up?
And then the crucial step is getting curious, asking the protector what it's afraid of.
Yes, exactly. If you can get a little space from it, not be totally blended with it, you ask, what vulnerability are you protecting here? What do you fear would happen if you didn't do this job, didn't react this way?
And that question leads you towards the exiles.
It's often a direct path. It helps you understand the exile's pain or fear that the protector is working so hard to prevent you from feeling or prevent from being exposed.
And understanding that vulnerability, the exile's fear or shame, helps you feel differently towards the protector.
Definitely. You start to see them less as like internal enemies and more like they.
Well, the source uses the image of overwhelmed young parents trying desperately to protect a vulnerable child. It can really open your heart to them.
So you acknowledge them, the protectors and the exiles they're hiding. Just let them know you see them, even if you can't fix anything right away. Yes, that acknowledgement itself can be powerful. And this connects back to the outer world. The source makes this key point. What happens in that inner world has tremendous implications for what happens in the outside world.
Right, so the exercise ends by bringing your focus back out, dealing with the external situation, but carrying that internal awareness with you.
And it acknowledges, look, this isn't always easy. Getting a sense of the exiles, their deep pain or shame or terror, that could be really unsettling, especially for the protectors whose job it is to keep that stuff buried.
So you might get some internal resistance, backlash.
Oh, absolutely. Protectors might try to pull you back into old patterns, flood you with doubts or criticisms. This is stupid. You can't handle this.
Well, what do you do then?
The source offers this really important reassurance. Remember that you are self. At your core, you possess qualities like courage, clarity, compassion, confidence, groundedness. Those messages saying you're weak or incapable, they're coming from parts stuck in the past, parts who think you're still that vulnerable kid.
Ah, okay. So you don't fight the parts, you recognize where the message is coming from.
Exactly. You notice them, you reassure them. You might say internally, I hear you, part. I know you're scared, but I'm not a child anymore. I can handle this now. You gently ask them to separate a bit so you, self, can be present with them rather than overwhelmed by them. It's about building that internal trust.
And there's a second, maybe simpler exercise mentioned too, for when the first one feels like too much.
Yes. If trying to map everything feels overwhelming, the second exercise is just about noticing the triggered parts without getting lost in them. Acknowledge they're there. Gently ask them for a little space so self can be present. Get curious about their struggle, just trying to understand it, and then offer reassurance. I'm here, I'm not young anymore, I can help. It's about validating your own capacity.
And these exercises, they're not just internal mental gymnastics, are they? The source says actually applying this stuff, like pausing in a fight, noticing your parts, speaking for them from self.
Makes a tremendous difference in actual relationships. The author mentions his own marriage as an example.
Yeah. And this leads to that really powerful point. Too many interactions are protector wars.
It's such a striking phrase, isn't it? And it applies everywhere, not just couples or families. Think about workplaces, communities.
And the source explicitly points to politics. Using the US as an example, with these polarized positions driven by extreme parts on each side just talking at each other.
Right. One side's extreme protector stance triggers the other side's extreme protector, and it just escalates. You see it in any system where there's low trust and lots of buried pain, lots of exiles,
It really highlights the difference between speaking from a reactive part like yelling, "That's ridiculous!"
versus pausing, connecting with self, and speaking for the part. Okay, hang on. A part of me just got really triggered by that, and underneath that part, I think I felt dismissed or misunderstood. The results are predictably different.
So learning to be self-led, learning to represent our parts instead of being run by them, it fundamentally changes how we exist in the world and relate to other people and their parts too.
Too many interactions are protector wars. It really is a powerful way to look at things from our closest relationships right up to global issues.
Wow. Okay. That was quite a deep dive. We've gone from unloading burdens, finding self, recognizing these inner parts, all the way to reframing difficult people as tormentors.
hmm It really does highlight how interconnected our inner world is with our outer experiences, our relationships, even larger societal
It
patterns.
really makes you wonder.
Well, yeah, if so much of the conflict we experience personally and collectively really stems from these internal protector wars playing out externally, what might happen if we focus more on understanding and healing those internal dynamics first?
Mm.
What might that reveal about the path to resolving conflict out there?
That's definitely something to mull over. This exploration of the source material has given us a lot to think about.
Absolutely. We hope this look at life lessons, burdens, and your unexpected teachers has sparked some useful insights, maybe a few aha moments for you to carry forward.